really enjoyed the fact that we had to really look within ourselves and rate different aspects of how we are in relationships.
It's such a good combination, I think, of common topics, but approached from a different perspective that most people in the West would not have access to.
I think a word that really stood out to me was the word undivided attention, and learning how to give that more is definitely one of the most important things I took away.
I thought the whole thing about trust building and the different levels of building trust through relationships, reciprocity and a word that I can never pronounce, and a few other things, I found it really, really useful and quite inspiring in the sense to want to go out and practice.
For the last half an hour, we've just been glued, getting more information out of how you would establish values to connect with people, how you would develop self-love before you can kind of connect with other people and build relationships. So that's been quite useful for me. I think everybody should come if they can and learn something.
Well, I love this speaker. He's a very inspirational person, and it's something that I highly recommend to everybody who wants to find a little bit of a spark in life and probably inspiration to continue doing more things.
It's a very unique event, and there's very few events like this in the city, so highly recommended. Even if you are vaguely interested in Vedic philosophy and its applications in modern day life, just come, book it and come. It's getting more and more popular by the day.
I think it was delivered really articulately, with complete compassion and understanding for what the audience would want to know. A really sweet, genuine speaker, I would say.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just wait for the last few of you to sit down. I'm Bijal, and I'm part of the corporate Dharma team that hosts these seminars. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to tonight's event, the Dharma of Relationships. I'm honored to be with you this evening and to have the opportunity to welcome our guest speaker and a dear friend, Edward Anobah. Edward incorporates insights from Vedic literatures and cutting-edge modern knowledge in order to assist people in achieving their personal and professional goals. This has led to engagements at firms such as Bank of America, UBS, JP Morgan, and Shell, to name a few. Edward is a mentor to many professionals globally who he has trained in skills such as networking, goal development, and relationship optimization. Finally, those of you who have attended our seminars before will agree that Edward is a very fascinating person, and we are definitely in for a treat this evening. So without further ado, if you could join me in welcoming Edward Anobah.
Okay, good, the mic's working. So good evening. It's wonderful to see so many old faces, friends, and so on. It's also wonderful to meet so many new people as well. We hope we'll be able to take you on an interesting journey for the next, let's say, hour or so, sharing various principles and insights into one of the most fascinating topics known to humankind. And this presentation this evening is called the Dharma of Relationships. I think it was Valentine's Day just recently, right? So some people will be here with their partners. For some people it went well. For some people, they don't want to talk about the subject. It was a different kind of experience. But we're dealing here today with the topic of relationships from a deeper perspective. We very much pride ourselves on bringing through what we call the Vedic or the Eastern perspective within various subject matters. Because we find that over the last, let's say, 25 years or so, it provides extremely powerful and deeper insights into every aspect of the human condition. Now, in order to get the most out of this evening, mutually, there also needs to be, let's say, 1 or 2 points about how we interact. We would encourage every single one of you in this process to share, to listen, to take notes, and above all, to participate. My own mentor, who passed away about 10 years ago, he would often say that the best way to learn anything is to teach it. So in our interaction with one another, we actually start to transform and to grow. Because one of my real inspirations in sharing this knowledge with all of you is not that we come, we hear something, we write some things down, then we go away and life remains the same. But I'm very much interested in transformation. Can anyone relate to that first of all, yes or no? Yes. Yeah? Okay. I'm very much interested in how we can utilize knowledge so that our experience of life is much deeper and much more powerful. Does that sound like something that you would all be interested in, yes or no? Yes. I can't really hear you, yes or no? Yes. Okay, good. So the participation is already beginning. It's fantastic. I was speaking earlier today to a group of professionals, and we were sharing some principles of leadership. And it's actually a forum where leaders come together, and leaders from different companies, and they'll discuss all the difficulties they're having. And in our presentation today, we were sharing something that we shared in a previous group session here, which was about the power of understanding ourselves and understanding other people. And as we go through this evening, we will give you more principles. Many of these things are things that you may not have heard before. Okay? But we request you to consider this point very carefully. That growth happens at the edge of our present understanding. Right? We don't expect you to accept blindly anything that we say today, but we also request and invite you to join us on an adventure where you do not blindly reject either, but we remain open-minded, interactive, and exploratory. We suggest that today the things or the points that you hear are things that you think about, things that you try, you experiment with, that you use, and ultimately things that you will get what we call realization from. Realization is a very powerful principle that's often not spoken about so much in the modern world. Realization means that I learned the principle of something and I practice that understanding so deeply that it becomes part of me. And that's where we start to have transformative experiences. The idea being that after we leave this session, if we continue to practice what we learn, then we actually come back to our associates, our relationships, our friends, our families, a different individual. An individual who is more and therefore who is able to actually give more to the relationship. Does that make sense? Okay. Are we ready for this journey? Yes or no? Yes. I didn't really hear that. Are we ready for the journey? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, good. We're just warming you up and then we'll see how we proceed from there. So, let's move on to our first point. So this is a real key topic that we're discussing today. Relationships. Right? Relationships, are they made in heaven or made in hell? It depends on who you're relating to, obviously, right? But we see a very interesting principle in modern society. In modern society, in our modern educational system, you will spend at least 10 plus years learning for a particular discipline, whether that is economics, mathematics, finance, humanities, etc. So we will spend a great deal of time, energy, and focus to learn about something on an academic or career-oriented level. But how many institutions do you know that actually teach the art of relationship? Think about that. And how significant that is. Is anyone here from Shell, by the way, the oil company? No? Okay, so we gave a presentation a few years ago at Shell, which was all around networking. And we were explaining how there are many people now whose whole field of opportunity has expanded because they've learned the art of developing relationship. And even in the field of marketing and advertising, what they're really working on is how to build a relationship between you and that particular brand. And you yourself, funnily enough, in one sense, you are also a brand. You have a particular identity. I was explaining in the previous talk how sometimes you meet someone and you feel that they carry a certain atmosphere around them, right? So sometimes you meet someone and you just feel some warmth coming from them. They're a very warm person, very positive, very bright, very sunny, right? So when you're around them, you actually feel quite cozy. You may kind of relax a little, put the shades on, whatever it is. But then other times you meet someone and the atmosphere feels distinctly chilly, right? You're around them and you feel distinctly awkward, or you feel a bit uneasy around them because the atmosphere, the mentality is actually quite cold. So we all are a brand, we all carry a certain type of energy. And as we understand these principles of relationship, we will see something very profound happen. Now, it's a very bold statement. It's a very bold statement. But we stand by it and we encourage you to experiment with what we are sharing with you today. Simple but sophisticated principles that can increase the quality of your relationships. Okay? So let's move on. This point is about relationships, heaven or hell. Actually, you decide. By your own interactions and by the quality of your giving, we'll distinctly talk about that, what we call reciprocity. You'll see how you can have a profound impact upon everyone in your circle, our circle of influence. Okay. So, let us begin with a consideration that you can discuss with someone close to you. Let us look at what we stand to gain and what we stand to lose in our relationships. Based upon the qualities of our interactions, let's begin by sensitizing ourselves to see all of the potential benefits that come when we deeply understand the art of relationship, and all of the potential losses that accrue in an individual's life where they are callous or whimsical within their interactions with other people. So because it's on relationships, I always like to get people to speak to someone that they don't know so well, or they don't know ideally. And I know some of you, I saw some of you come in together, so don't pretend that you've met them for the first time. I know what goes on in these little get-togethers, okay? I've got my eye on you. But we'd like you to ideally speak to someone who you do not know, okay? And discuss with them what you see as the key. And this is an individual thing, because there's many gains and losses. But based upon you as an individual, your life as it is now, your present experiences, desires, needs, share with someone that you don't know, you'll move around in this room, what you consider to be the key gains and the key losses based upon the quality of your interactions with others. In other words, based upon the quality of your relationships. Okay, we're going to get you moving around and we're going to get you to practice the things that we're speaking about, because we want to embed the understanding and embed the knowledge, okay? So we'll give you up until past, move around the room, introduce yourself and share that point. 5 minutes starting from now. Okay, so we're going to continue. And I'll just make a comment that was actually very well done as an exercise. Because I know that sometimes you have people in the audience who are a bit shy and they may not want to speak so much, but I found it difficult to stop you guys talking. That's always a good sign. So let's keep that kind of mood and that pace going. So you were discussing, apart from introducing yourself to your partner, you were discussing what you consider to be the main gains and losses within relationship. Now, I would actually say to you that actually, in relationship, you stand to gain everything. Some of the most successful people in the world are people who didn't actually have so much in terms of hard skills. but they were extremely good in terms of building connections with other people. And in building meaningful connections with other people, they were able to gain access to so many different opportunities, resources, types of expertise. As we come on to it, we'll talk about just a few of the specific gains that one can have, for example, in a business relationship. But as we go through these principles which relate to all types of relationships. Right? So the first exercise was just to get you to focus in on how much we stand to gain, how much we stand to lose if we do not understand the significance of this area. And even though we're discussing it today, this is a very short presentation, I would suggest to you that anyone who's very intelligent would make the study of how to be expert in relationships a lifelong endeavor. It is perhaps the greatest discipline, and in many respects, the greatest system or channel for fulfillment. Because through our relationships, we feel inspired, we can feel supported. So many other benefits are there, okay? So thank you for taking part in this first part of the exercise. Let us move on. So trust. We've shared this before, but we want to give you these 6 principles that distinctly help you to build trust, because trust underpins all relationships. There is no access, there is no relationship if there is no trust. So we have 6 principles, 6 extremely potent principles, and in some ways definitive principles that you can take away, you can use them immediately in any relationship. And what we're going to do in a moment, you can also use these 6 principles as a tool for evaluation. And we're going to get you to do this as a little bit of an introspective exercise. You can evaluate the trust credit. How much trust exists between you and any particular individual, whether it's your partner, your children, your manager, by evaluating how many of these 6 you actively use in your relationship whenever they become appropriate. So let's just read through these 6 and then we'll get you to do a ranking exercise. Notice how practical these are. So you can use these immediately and they will make an immediate difference. What we're talking about here is building up a credit. Relationships have different status, between you and different individuals because you interact with different individuals in a different way. Furthermore, and we'll talk about this later on, relationships have a different flavor between you and another individual because of your own character and how well you connect with that particular individual. Okay? So, the first one is to clarify expectations. This is often missed in groups, relationships, departments, projects, that 2 people come together and they just naturally expect different things and they assume that the other person knows, they haven't discussed it, and then later on it causes a difficulty. When I was discussing with some people in a session I was giving on male-female relationships, I was explaining that in the Vedic tradition, when a couple are coming together, they don't wait until they're attached to each other to discuss key principles about how they want to live. This is very, very important. This is a gift that we're trying to share with you. And believe me, this is a small gift, but it makes such a profound difference, especially in male-female relationships. And that is, if you meet someone who you're considering as a potential partner, you should actually discuss very early what type of lifestyle you want to lead, right? How many children you want to have. Where will you actually live? Because believe me, even though it seems like a small thing, these are the things that make or break most relationships. And then you have the classic statement from one partner or the other, well, if you love me, you do what I want. Now, funnily enough, your partner's thinking exactly the same thing as you, right? So one person is thinking, if this person loved me, they will do what I would like. But the other person is thinking, if they loved me, they will do what I like. Because no one had the discussion beforehand and it was just assumed It was just taken for granted that whatever I desire in the relationship, the other person also has the same desires. Does that work? Yes or no? No. It doesn't actually work. We're going to have a bit of a relationship conflict here. It generally doesn't work, because unless by chance you meet someone who has similar needs and desires as you, these become a point of friction or conflict. So this principle of clarifying expectations is a key thing in all relationships, and especially in terms of trust. So when you're interacting with people, clarify what they expect of you, and you should clarify what you expect of them. That's principle number 1. Principle number 2, share relevant information. Trust goes down, and you've seen this again, in your departments when something is going on and they didn't tell you, right? You found out afterwards, and then you start to wonder, are they involving me? Why didn't they share the information that they were meant to share, etc.? Right? If you understand these 6 principles and you become practiced in doing that, you can even use them as a form of having a trust audit within your organization. You can assess organizationally or departmentally how many of these 6 principles do we use regularly? Where does our organization or our department fall short within these 6 principles? And therefore, what do we need to practice more? What systems can we put in place to make sure that these things are taken care of? Okay, so sharing relevant information is the second one. Third one is honoring commitments. If you say you're going to do something and you want to keep your relationship healthy, strong, and you want people to trust you, you have to follow through. Now, of course, there may be times when we say we're going to do something, but due to challenges, force of circumstance, unexpected happenings, we can't follow through. That happens. That's normal. But then we should immediately communicate to the other individual, I said I will do this by this date. Something has come upon my situation. I wasn't expecting it, but it means that I will not be able to follow through with my commitment. Can we reschedule or renegotiate the commitment? Okay, so that's number 3, to honor commitments. Number 4, a very interesting one. They say to err is human. Number 4 means admit mistakes. Trust actually increases when you're able to admit that you made a mistake. People actually trust you more because they consider that you're reasonable and you're humble and you're open to feedback. Of course, if you're always making the same mistake, it has a different effect. Okay, a little bit of a caveat there that you may want to take notice of. But admit mistakes, and number 5 is make amends. Okay, so if you do something wrong, you should admit it quickly. And at the same time, you should be able to negotiate or to offer a course of action that can help to rectify the impact of that particular mistake. And again, that builds great trust. Trust means relationship. If people like you and they trust you, believe me, so many doors will be open to you that you could not possibly imagine. It's simply one step away by implementation. So we really encourage you to take note of this, although we will also share some information after the presentation with you via email, I think, for those who fill in the feedback form. My manager wanted me to plug that little bit extra in there. But this is such a great topic and a great science. The last one is allow for mutual influence. If an individual is making themselves very vulnerable to you, and you are not reciprocating by being open to them, then they can, not always, but they may have some reservation about sharing more. Because they may feel that I've exposed so much about myself to you, so therefore there's inequality. Now you know much about me, but I don't know anything about you. Therefore, I feel uncomfortable because with what I've shared with you, you may misuse it. But then I've got no counterbalance in terms of what I know about the other individual. Does that make some sense? So these 6 principles are key for building trust. 6 very simple, very sophisticated, very profound principles. So now we'd like you to do a rating exercise. So for each of these 6, we'd like you to rate yourself in terms of how well you practice each of these 6 principles, because by rating, you'll immediately be able to see where you're strong in terms of trust building, and you'll immediately have a sensitivity to where you can build stronger relationship by building greater trust, by practicing that 1 or 2 key principles of trust, okay? So these 6 give each a rating between 0 to 10. 0 means you tend to never do this. 10 means it's second nature, you do it just like as easy as breathing, okay? So 1 to 6 give each principle a rating between 0 to 10. We'll give you a couple of seconds to do that now. If you write that down, yeah? If you write down your rating for each of these 6 principles. So now I'm going to say something in addition to this about trust building. We all have people in our lives that we feel a profound and natural rapport with. There'll be people that we meet and we feel inspired to be open and to be trusting towards such people. We're going to do a little exercise now in which we're going to explore additional dimensions to trust. And therefore, trust is a subsection of relationship. So when we're examining this additional dimension to trust, we're also examining how we can become more potent and more expert in our general relationships. What I'm going to ask you to think about are 2 individuals, okay? I want you to think about one individual who you naturally feel a great deal of trust. You naturally feel very trusting towards them. You feel they're very trustworthy, okay? So I want you to think about that individual on one hand. And I'd like you to think about someone else who you distinctly don't trust, okay? Hopefully not someone in this room, because that could damage the relationships in the room here. But 2 individuals. One who you trust deeply, and someone who you distinctly distrust. And what I'd like you to do, again, with someone different, because we want to help this to be a networking experience, I'd like you to share what specifically or what characteristics you see present in both individuals. So the one who you trust, what is it about their behavior that causes or inspires you to feel that sense of trust in them? And the ones who you distrust, what is it about their behavior that distinctly makes you feel uneasy about trusting them? The purpose behind this is that whatever we see in those characters who we trust, those are the behaviors that we try to model and to emulate in all of our relationships. So again, find someone else in the room, speak. You don't have to share names if you don't want to, but distinctly, a person you trust and why. What is it that they do that inspires that trust in you? And then the opposite also, someone that you distrust, what are the behaviors or the attitudes or the interactions, what are the elements that inspire that distrust? So we'll give you 5 minutes starting from now. Please. Okay, this is wonderful. Again, I really commend you. I think you're a very good audience. You really take the time to really discuss, open up, and that's very powerful. It seems like a small thing, but every time you're doing that and you're discussing and sharing, you're growing. The best way to learn anything is to teach it. So when you share, reflect, all of these things help these things that we're discussing to become more deeply embedded as part of our character. So I'd like to learn something from you now. So could someone share with me 1 or 2 things that they've seen in someone that they actually trust? So what principles from your own experience are modeled by individuals which inspire trust? Would anyone like to share?
I think what we kind of discussed was communication. If a person shuts the doors, then it's difficult to communicate, and the rest all will not probably happen. So, communication is very key.
Okay, wonderful. So you're making the point that this individual is someone who communicates very openly, and that inspires trust. Thank you. Yourself, sir?
Stickability.
Could you expand?
They're there regularly, no matter what.
Excellent. That's a very powerful one. Consistency. Yeah? Very, very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Anything else that came up in your discussion? Maybe one more. Yes?
I think it was familiarity.
Okay.
The longer you've known people.
Yes.
Maybe when you've grown up with them, or work for 10, 20 years with them. It's the familiarity that, encourages the trust.
Okay, wonderful. So that sense of having a long period of getting to know someone, that they have a track record of being there, and therefore it builds trust, that's actually very powerful. That means in many cases, if you are able to simply keep the relationship going positively, trust will come automatically. Yes? Okay, wonderful. That's a brilliant point, because we'll do something on that actually. You just reminded me. Excellent. Key point is definitely the ability to listen and to hear. Thank you. That's really good. At the back, yes, sir.
A warm smile.
A warm smile. Smile goes a long way. It's interesting you said that, actually. I'm practicing my warm smile now. There was a study, various studies, have found that we distinctly come to some evaluation of any individual within the first few seconds of meeting them. So this is very significant in relation to your point. And that if the first few seconds are positive, then they actually have to do a huge amount of negative things to remove that positive impression. But the opposite is also true. If the first impression is negative, you really have to work to overcome that. But it's interesting, I was preparing a presentation on another subject on how to get things done, how to achieve. And there's one interesting statement, it's been on my mind a lot, and the statement is fate follows action. That no matter what the situation one is in, by appropriate action, you can improve a situation, right? Of course, if we're conscious, then we'd never let situations go so bad that we have to do a lot of work to bring it to neutral before it becomes positive. But remember this maxim. It's from a very great, we call them brahmanas or advisors, called Chanakya. He says, fate follows action. Yeah? So in one sense, our fate is in our hands because every single behavior, I think I've moved slightly, okay, I'll move it back. Every single behavior affects us in some way, shape or form. Okay. So that's a very key point. Maybe one more if anyone else wanted to share and then we'll move on. Yes, sir.
Sincerity.
Sincerity. Great point. Thank you very sincerely for sharing that. Yes, sincerity. It actually comes from the word sincere, which means literally without wax. So what would happen is at particular points in history, people would try and fill in gaps with from marble with wax. It would look like there's a greater mass of marble. So it would be more valuable. So when something is unalloyed, when something is free of ulterior motive, and when something is actually directed for the well-being of others, believe me, it's such a powerful principle. And we call this reciprocity. We'll talk about that also. And we'll show you a little video. And how this video is actually a statement made by one doctor who studied human psychology and how people gain influence. And he outlined a certain series of principles, and one of them is reciprocity. We'll deal with that because it underpins a principle which is given in the Vedas, which is called seva. That when service is done for the benefit of another, it's extremely profound. It's an extremely powerful principle upon which you can build lasting and strong relationships. So thank you, we'll come back to that. So, let me just go us back to where we were. Now, this is interesting. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Right? So, our relationships, for them to have longevity, they must be based upon reality. Sometimes there's a false conception of what it means to be humble. Humble means truthful. So for us to have good relationships, we also have to be humble. We have to be truthful about who we are and who the other person is and how we, if at all, we will relate. This is very, very important. If we just try to pretend, then it doesn't work. Because we always come face to face with reality in the long term. I'm just sharing this because there's a common misconception that modern society has around relationships, right? Especially when we're talking about close relationships. By nature, you will not be close to everyone. It's a very, very strong, profound, simple, but important point to share with you so you don't have difficulties in life which are completely unnecessary. There's a mythology in modern society that you can be close to everyone, but actually you don't need to be, and you will not be close to everyone. Because relationships require time, they require effort. Who has unlimited time and effort in this room? Right? That's the first thing. And second, it requires some common ground. Right? So you need to have something. We discussed this before in our previous presentation. I was explaining to some people who were trainers in diversity. I was explaining that there's a myth in diversity. The myth is that you get people and everyone's from different backgrounds and they all come together, and because they're all from different backgrounds, they all have this different perspective and things work. It doesn't actually work like that. The differences are important, but along with differences, there must be common ground. In many cases, people struggle because they have relationships where they're different in ways which are not complementary, and they have practically nothing in common. And yet they just keep trying to make it seemingly work. We didn't take the angle about male-female psychology so much for this presentation, but in the Vedic culture, in the Vedic system of teaching, the idea is that when you look for a partner, you find someone who is actually compatible. Someone who has similar values, similar life goals. Because relationship doesn't just mean where you and the other person is now. It is also profoundly to do with the direction that you're heading in. And I think practically every one of us in this room will have had experiences where we know people, they are touching base now, but they know that they're moving in completely different directions. So over time, what happens to that relationship? And all of these things could have been foreseen earlier on if there was this open communication and an honest discussion about what's important and where people want to go. Very, very important principle. Let's move on. Okay, so listening. One of the deepest and most profound ways to build relationship is to give your attention to someone. It's in one sense, it's something that we hear about, but there's a science to practicing listening, right? There's a science to actually how to lead your life so that you can give your full and heartfelt attention to other people. In many cases, when people come to us and they're distressed or they're having some confusion, they actually know what to do. Have you ever experienced that? All they're looking for is someone to listen. And through the process of listening, they can come to their own conclusions about how to move forward. And the power of that, the power of them coming to their own conclusions, is that if they've come to that realization themselves, are they more likely to do it, yes or no? Yes. So it's a very profound way to help people. It's a very profound way to build relationship. What I'd like you to do as an exercise, we have here this diagram, reveal, listen, and where they overlap it says understanding. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to share with someone, you can maybe someone sitting right near to you, something that's on your mind, something that's a little bit of a concern or something you're feeling some confusion about, okay? Just share with them, and you'll share with them first, and the other person, all I want you to do is practice, and it's a real practice, giving your complete attention to that particular individual, okay? It seems like a small thing, but it does huge benefit. And it does require practice, because in our modern society, we're especially inclined to just cut people short and give them a solution and get their hell away from them as quickly as possible because they ain't paying us to be their therapist, etc. But we want to try and do something different in this kind of understanding. There's a therapist in the room, so I have to be careful I say that. Okay, so the point is that we'll do is just 2 minutes either side, okay? You're just going to share briefly, but share something that's on your mind, that's of a concern to you, that you feel comfortable expressing in this particular forum. And the other person, all that I require you to do, all that you are required to do, I repeat, is give that person your undivided but heartfelt attention, okay? Just for 2 minutes, strictly 2 minutes. Then we'll switch over and then we'll continue. Is that okay? Okay, 2 minutes, go. Let's continue. So if I could have your attention, please. Okay. Now I can see that for some of you, you haven't had that kind of undivided attention for some time now. So you're kind of enjoying it. That's fine. We're here to have a good time. Does that feel good? Yes or no? Yeah. It's a very, very simple thing, but just the focused attention of another individual, it actually says something very profound. It says that you're valuable. It says that you're important. It says that the concerns that you have are actually important to me. It does a huge amount to build something in terms of the relationship between you and that individual. Most people naturally respond just to attention. It sounds so simple, but in many cases it doesn't require much more than that. So another tool in your armory for building better relationships is that when you are interacting with people, please, if you can, develop that ability to give this undivided attention. It will take your relationships very, very far. And it will help you to be a great advisor to others, and what you give will come back. And you can be a great advisor because you're great at listening. You can really try to understand and connect with the experience of the other individual. What that does is it actually touches people. It actually touches people. When people are moved by your association, then so much is open and so much is available through that relationship. Okay, so my manager's reminded me that I've got a few slides and we're almost up for time, so I am going to slightly speed through, but we won't lose any content. Let's move on. This is a point we made in our previous presentation, but I thought it's good to bring up here. If you want others to understand you, first you should know yourself. Right? Someone who doesn't have a deep connection with themselves, it's hard to have deep connections with other people. It's just, again, it's not the kind of thing you just hear everywhere, but it's true. And we're not here to just kind of give you some superficial knowledge. We want to give you something that has some depth to it, so it will actually make a big difference to your life. That means, self-knowledge also means introspection, understanding who you are, what your desires are, what your values are. When I was giving this presentation earlier today to some professionals, I gave them a list of values, and I asked them to actually mark down which values are important. And we were explaining how when your life is in line with your values, there's more coherence. You feel more harmonious about yourself because you know that you're living according to what's important to you. Therefore, the opposite is also true. Disharmony. Disharmony meaning that when you're in a bad state, you'll carry that over into your relationships. Disharmony comes by not being clear on your values and therefore not clear on your decisions because you don't have that compass by which to make those decisions. And therefore that lack of clarity can get you involved in different kinds of circumstances and situations that in hindsight you think to yourself, why the hell did I get involved in this? Many people in society, I guarantee you, most people in society do not have a compass. They don't have a clear understanding about what is important to them in their life and what they are meant to be striving for. And that is perhaps one of the biggest issues or obstacles to relationship, and it's so subtle at the same time. So we really want to give you that opportunity to think deeply on that. We don't have the time to do that now, but we're planting that seed within your own mind, within your own consciousness. Try to understand what are the values that I hold dear. And we would encourage, because the Vedic teaching does encourage that those values should not just include things around the physical health or even the mental health, but increasingly, and many great personal development speakers like Tony Robbins and others speak about, increasingly for harmony to be there, there also must be what we would consider like an internal or spiritual dimension to our lives, where we're also considering the deeper questions within our life. That gives us a certain kind of anchor and a certain kind of code as to how we deal, such as, who am I? What is the purpose of existence? What should I be striving for? And the Vedas give very profound answers around that in addition. So let's move on. So, the Swajati secret. This is a very key principle, Swajati. Swajati means literally like-minded. This refers to the point I made earlier, and that is that every one of us have a certain value system, a certain nature. So if you want to build relationships and you have the choice, don't fool yourself into thinking that you have to be close to everyone. It's a myth. It's a modern day myth. Look for people who have similar values. Don't be fooled, especially in male-female relationships. Don't be fooled by just thinking that because a person looks a certain way, or they have a certain external status, or they work in a particular environment, that therefore that's enough to make a relationship work. Try to understand this key principle that relationships are built on values. And try to understand through discussion and interaction the values of the individuals, whether it's work relationship or other relationships, the values of that the individual has and that they live by, and then you should see on that basis. For relationships to work, the Vedas explain that there must be the people should be similar in the right areas, and they should also be different or complementary also in the right areas. If they're just completely the same, it doesn't work. If they're just completely different, that also doesn't work because there's no common ground. Do you see the point? It's a science, but often it's forgotten because we're so much caught up in the externals in modern society. And that's why, unfortunately, the divorce rate in this present age is very, very high in Western society. To the extent that in most cases, statistically, the majority of marriages are going to fail. And that doesn't take into account those people who live in the same house and practically hate each other's guts. You understand what I'm saying? It's a very deep principle that we want to share because we don't want to see you suffer unnecessarily, but we want to see how you can excel. There's also a subtle point related to this. That is that if you want to build relationship with another person, understand what's important to them, that's their values, and also try to work from that point of connection. Find some common ground. Whether it's an interest, whether it's a project, you need some common ground upon which to build a connection. So an intelligent person who knows about relationships, they search, they explore in their interactions with other people to find something that's important. Salesmen are often taught to find what's called the pain point sometimes. Someone has a real issue that's burning inside them, something they need help with, and then they help to solve that problem. And that relieves the pain. And therefore, it brings people closer. Does that make some sense? Okay. I think we're almost done. Just a quick word on business relationships. So, why do we build business relationships? 6 quick things. This is not exhaustive. First, what you don't have, the other person has. So by building relationship, you actually build your capacity. Second, conversation marketing. That simply means that as you speak to other people, the information travels about what you can offer, what they can offer, and your networks increase. Third, reach expansion. That's related. You don't know someone who can help, but the person you know, they know someone who can help. So your reach, your opportunities expand as you build healthy business relationships. Improved industry expertise. This is something I was explaining to these heads of companies earlier today, that as a leader, you must have mentors. If you're a leader and you think that you understand everything yourself, you're in trouble. Because you will always have blind sides. So if you're smart, throughout your life, one of the most powerful things to collect is collect wise advisors. You can collect wise advisors in practically every sphere of your life, and then you inquire from them and you also do things for them, you share with them. And it has such a profound effect. When I was preparing this seminar I'm going to give maybe later this year, I was making a note of one principle that Chanakya gives. He says, wisdom comes from serving your elders, right? And then it goes on to explain that in any sphere, if someone knows more than you in that particular subject, they're older than you in that particular area. Does that make sense? So you may have someone and they're junior to you generally, but because they understand a certain subject better than you, within that particular discipline, you're junior to that particular individual. So therefore, you defer to their guidance in that particular sphere of expertise. If you understand that, you can get the best out of everyone. Very, very powerful principle. Different problems, different solutions. What's easy for you is difficult for someone else and vice versa. Your big issue for them is easy. They can share with you the answer. Their big issue for you, it's easy. You can help them. So there's a complement that takes place. And then business itself is a system of relationships. I was told years ago by one very accomplished individual. He said to me, business is just maths and relationships. And it's interesting, Richard Branson stated that he learned early on that he had an aptitude for building connections and relationships with people. And he attributes that to as the key principle, or one of the key principles, which have allowed him to be successful. Okay. We're almost at the end. We'll have questions in a moment. This is one key principle that we touched on earlier, and I'm going to hone in on this as a last point. This is the forgotten art of reciprocation. When you actually focus on giving, you'll find that your relationships become most alive. In the Vedic tradition, we call this seva, and the seva can be there to humankind, but there's also an even higher level of seva when it's seva aimed at the supreme. So just to bring that point into your consciousness for your awareness, and hopefully in our master classes we can delve a bit deeper into that principle. But reciprocation is very powerful. This is used in advertising every single day. There have been studies which have shown, you have experience. Someone posts a little small packet of shampoo in your letterbox, right? Or you get something on the street. You had that experience? It's not because the businessmen just feel really charitable that day, okay? Sorry to say. What actually happens is, studies have been done which have found that when you give someone something for free first, they feel a psychological obligation to reciprocate at some point in time. This is called the law of reciprocity. And so this is used, but it's actually a perversion of a deeper principle. Because the greatest reciprocation comes when you serve or give with no expectation of return. When it's selfless, it actually has the most profound impact upon the person that you're sharing with. And of course, a little caveat there, because people often say that's not realistic. You should do it wisely. This is not about being taken advantage of. It's not that, I came to the seminar, they said we should be selfless, so therefore I just give all my money away and my credit cards. It's not like that. This is done wisely. With people who are Swajati, that means they can appreciate that giving. And they can reciprocate with that giving. It's a very powerful principle, but don't be scared to give. Never be scared to give, because you will always get more back in the long term. And we'll just show you a little video. And this is Robert Cialdini explaining this principle of reciprocation. So if you could play that, please. Just to explain briefly, what he's actually saying is that various studies have found that people feel naturally inspired to reciprocate with something that's done for them. As we mentioned before, we've mentioned a few times deliberately, this idea of giving, of service. We often live in a society where it becomes a take society. But what we don't understand is those most successful individuals, they've actually understood this principle. And the best advertising campaigns also use this same principle. So don't be fooled by thinking that it's all about what you can receive. Actually, psychologically and also externally, the greatest impact and the greater fulfillment comes when we give, but we give wisely. We call this principle seva, and as we said before, it happens in our interactions with each other and also in different traditions, spiritual traditions. It is also there in relation to the Supreme. Okay, so we've shared a few principles. We had some very nice background music as well, but we won't talk about that so much. I wanted to thank you for your time, and we have a few minutes for questions before we close fully. Thank you very much for your time. Two minutes for questions? Okay. So there's microphones, so if you put your hands up, then we'll pass the microphone to you, and then you can ask your question. So there's one person here. And before you ask, let me just say also, please do use these points that we've shared. This is not an exercise in just having a good time. We want you to experience the benefits for yourself. Yes?
Thanks, Edward, for an inspiring talk. I've always wondered, if a relationship breaks down because of trust issues and whatever, whoever's fault it is, do you think you can ever reach that level that it was before?
Good point. I know people who've had relationships which have broken down and they've actually regained the trust. It requires work. It's not easy. It requires a consistent re-engagement and a consistent record to show that one is remorseful and that one's changed their behavior. And also it requires humility, because both parties have to be able to see what they did wrong and really honestly try to work on improving. But it is possible. It's very difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible. Yeah? Thank you. Other question? Yes.
In a relationship, is it better to part ways if it's established that the value systems between the two persons are different?
Good question. It depends on the status of the relationship. If other people are involved, such as children and so on, then one may try to make it work for the greater good of all concerned. Ideally what you would do, as we said before, is establish these points earlier. See, again, and it's important to mention this, through the media, I almost kept a slide on this deck, which was looking at the influence of the media. Because when you watch TV or you go into the cinema and you watch a film, it puts the mind in an alpha state. In the alpha state, the mind is 5 times more receptive to whatever they're seeing. So even if you're not consciously aware of it, through so much input from the media, we have the idea that the relationship is all about me. So it's what, the other person is just meant to make me happy. So then you have 2 thieves coming together to get something from someone else. So therefore it breaks down. But really, relationship is based upon values and communication and the other principles we mentioned. So it requires people to be wise enough to have those discussions early on. Not to just assume that because you feel very strongly, everything is going to work out. And that's a model or a narrative we see in so many films, right? So you've got the guy, he's just working in the library, quiet by himself, but they stole his mom. So suddenly he becomes like a one-man army. And it's like, how did he learn to use a gun? He's a librarian. I mean, what happened? Suddenly, he's just flying through, shoot. There's 10 people with machine guns. They're shooting him, none of the bullets touch him. But whenever he fires his pistol, every single one of them dies. I mean, really? It's just unrealistic, but we have this subconscious programming because of that. So to answer your question, the idea is to establish the value system before you proceed. And it requires honesty. Actually, it also requires some self-love. You have to love yourself, not to be so desperate to be with someone that you can be honest. If we're too desperate, then we'll just deny everything in the name of wanting to be with someone, then we find out later on that actually it wasn't true. Therefore, it's also wise to get perspectives from other people who know you and hopefully know the other person. Okay? Great question. I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for your time. Throughout the year, we will be presenting masterclasses and different things, and you'll receive that information as the year progresses. Thank you.